I hadn't planned on doing a Politoed video, but multiple people pointed out to me that the ion coding strategy that I used in the Suicune video would pair very well with Politoed, a card that I like very much and wish was a lot more playable, so here we go. It's a great looking card with 3 very interesting attacks, so let's start with the first attack, Sudden Growth. It's Rain Dance for 1 colorless energy, except that you're not limited to basic water energy. It's any type of basic energy cards from your hand can be played directly onto Politoed after using Sudden Growth, making the 2 other high energy attacks much more viable. And it is nice that Sudden Growth allows for any type of basic energy because that means you can load down Politoed with lightning energy from your hand. More on that in a bit. For 3 energy, you can Frog Hop for 30 damage with the potential to do 50 damage off of a coin flip, and for 5 energy, you can deal 70 damage and move 2 basic water energy cards attached to Politoed to 1 or 2 of your benched Pokemon. Something we've seen work very well with lightning type decks, ensuring that you're attacking for high damage off of high amounts of energy, but also moving those energy onto your bench just as a safety precaution so that if your attacking Pokemon gets knocked out next turn, you're only out 3 energy in the discard instead of 5, and it's likely that you have a Pokemon on the bench already powered up from those attacks. As mentioned earlier, the other big component of this deck is Aquapolis Lantern with the Ion Coding Pokepower. This allows you to transform all lightning energy attached to the active Pokemon into water energy, not only allowing Politoed to attack with 5 lightning energy on there as if they were water energy, but those lightning energy stay transformed into water energy long enough for you to energy splash them onto your bench, at which point they then become lightning energy again. This makes it possible to attack for 70 damage off of an energy splash as early as turn 3, something that most e-reader decks are not able to accomplish, and something that is going to make fire type decks very scared. The rest of the deck list kind of fills itself out, and it may be a tad polarizing, but I'm feeling froggy, so let's hop on in. You done been towed once. Something about amphibians. I don't know. Let's look at the deck list. Starting with our base tadpole, Poliwag. There are 2 e-reader Poliwag to choose from. As usual, I just went with the one that has higher HP. The other Poliwag has 40 HP. It's completely up to you. Pretty much does not matter. As within eCard, there's not really anything that's gonna be dealing 40 damage within the first 2 turns, nor is there anything that's gonna snipe for 40 damage, and there's not really a whole lot of gusting going on in eCard. So a full playset of Poliwag from Expedition, and then 3 copies of Poliwhirl from Skyridge. And that's solely because these are the ones I had on hand. The other Poliwhirl from Expedition also has 70 HP, and it has a 2 colorless punch attack that lets you deal 20, which in this deck is probably better, but none are really gonna be game changing depending on which Poliwhirl you want to choose. And then of course we'll be topping off this Toad line with 3 copies of Politoed. And are you guys sick of seeing Electabuzz in all of my rogue decks? Because it's in here again because it's just that good. It's just an ideal starting Pokemon. For 1 colorless energy, you are energy ramping, you're thinning the deck, and then next turn you're dealing damage while also distributing that ramped energy onto your bench. As mentioned in the intro, we're going to be using that Lantern Ion Coding trick to streamline our method for getting just a bunch of energy onto a Politoed and allowing it to attack for big old damage. Like with the Poliwags, the choice of Chinchou doesn't really matter. I just chucked in a couple of the Aquapolis ones. I like that it has the colorless energy requirement. Same thing for Lantern. It can attack if you really need to. It also has the potential for big damage, but at a bigger cost as you have to discard basic lightning energy off of it. So as you can see, the strategy is very similar to that Lantern Suicune deck, except that your damage output is a lot higher. You have a big gun stage 2 to build around instead of the basic Suicune that has a lower damage output. The problem with working with stage 2 is you do have a lot less room in the deck for other options like Zapdos. Not that Zapdos is a necessity, it's just a nice add-on. This deck does solely focus on powering up either a Politoed or a Lantern and dealing whatever damage is going to be best, whether it's coming from a water source or an electric source. The trainer support is going to remain pretty standard. Full playset of Pokemon Fan Club to help search out those basic Pokemon. Full playset of Petum to get the evolution cards, Professor Oak's Research, Underground Expedition, and Copycat for draw support. Each one is useful in its own way, just depending on what type of scenario you find yourself in. Like with most e-reader decks, finding what you need isn't necessarily difficult. Sometimes it takes a few turns, just because you can only play one supporter per turn, and this deck has a lot of supporters in it. And that's just so that you can draw what you need. You're not necessarily going to be using 4 Professor Elm's training method every game. You might, but it's in there just so that you likely have it in your opening hand, and if not, it's easier to draw one of them. Because eCard's heavily focused on Stage 2 Pokemon, and even on their Stage 1 Pokemon, it's pretty heavily focused on 3 energy attacks. So the opening 3 to 4 turns are pretty slow on either side of the table most of the time, as everybody's just trying to search out what they need for their setup. Past turn 4, that's when it becomes a game of who has the better setup, who has the better matchup, and then you pretty much just start swinging at each other until the game is over. It really picks up after turn 4 or 5, but usually early game is all supporter play, moving things around, and analyzing your resources. Because there's no Zapdos in here, there's no other way to get those lightning energy back out of your discard. We got a couple copies of Town Volunteers, 2 copies of Switch just to get around the slightly higher retreat costs of Politoed and Electabuzz, and 4 copies of Potion just to keep those Politoads alive as long as possible, just because the more opportunities you have to attach energy onto Politoed and then Energy Splash to move those onto your bench, the heavier your bench is going to get, which is going to make you more of a threat the later you get into the game. Even one extra turn of Energy Splash is going to mean that you're probably going to have a fully powered Politoed already on your bench by the time your opponent knocks out your active one. Because Electabuzz is ideally going to be getting off at least a couple of Reflect Energies early game anyway, so you really set yourself up for victory just by yanking energy out of the discard or playing a bunch from your hand and then just moving them over to your bench. And the mix of energy is just in case a Lantern does get knocked out. And the question is, how does Politoed stack up against Suicune when it comes to gameplay and matchups? Because Suicune can enter the game on turn 1, you don't have to evolve it, but you do have to wait until 3 energy are attached in order to use Hypno Wave. Electabuzz does help out with that, but you're still looking at attacking starting on turn 3, which is the same for Politoed, but Politoed has a higher damage output, but also requires more setup. Politoed does have the potential to knock out a lot of Stage 1 Pokemon if your opponent is lagging behind a turn, which Suicune most likely cannot do. Politoed also has more attacking options for if a couple of energy do get knocked off, but overall from playtesting both of these decks a lot, I can say that Politoed is definitely the more fun build, but that from a competitive standpoint, Suicune is preferable simply because it's easier to set up a second Suicune on the bench than it is to set up a second Politoed on the bench. And with Suicune, the extra deck space that Poliwags and Poliwhirls would otherwise be filling up gives you more options to just tech in some metagame relative cards. You can do some interesting stuff by including a copy of the Plunge Poliwrath in this deck as well, just so you can load up a Politoed with energy straight from your hand and then pass it along to Poliwrath next turn. But you do have to flip a coin to use Plunge, which takes away a ton of viability from it, and kinda distracts from what you ultimately want to do with a Politoed anyway, so it's not suggested, but it is an option. I will leave the rest of the deck text up to you guys. Let me know down in the comments how you would build around Politoed any differently, and what you think of the deck overall. I believe that this is going to be the very last eCard video. I did get some other requests to build around eCard Cloyster and Slowpoke, and the Slowpoke lines, and I did not have any luck in developing anything meaningful out of those, so I do apologize to the people that requested those. This one does make the 30th video I've been able to upload just over the past couple of months, so I'm very proud of that fact, and I appreciate anyone that's tuned in for eCard. I'm not completely done with WotC. We're still going to be talking some wizard cards, so just hang in there. There may be a short break between this video and the next upload as we're wrapping up eCard. But if you do have any eCard decks or strategies that you're wanting a closer look at, I can always revisit. And if you like the stuff I'm throwing up on YouTube, feel free to leave a like, comment, share. All of that stuff helps the algorithm. Thanks for watching this video till the end. Social media links are down in the description, and I will see you next time.